welcome to our program, Voices of Experience. This program is sponsored by the Minnesota State Retirees Council, which is an affiliate of the Minnesota AFL-CIO. The Minnesota AFL-CIO is a statewide federation of labor in the state of Minnesota, representing unionized men and women throughout the state. My name is Brommer. I'm retired from the office of president of the Minnesota AFL-CIO, and I'll be serving as your host for today's program. Minnesota state government is facing a severe budget crisis. Economic forecasts predict that revenue will fall some $6 billion short of projected expenditures for the coming biennium. The situation has serious economic, social, and political consequences for people in Minnesota. There is an ongoing debate about what to do, how to address the problem and balance the state budget. Reduce spending, increase taxes, reduce taxes, privatize government services, sell public resources to the highest bidder, layoffs, and the list goes on. The debate is loud and emotional. Anger and frustration abound on all sides of the debate. Some proposals being advanced are extreme and unfair. Unfortunately, there are citizens who will support any solution as long as they are not directly affected. Other, more responsible voices are suggesting balanced, fair, and equitable solutions. Among those voices is Growth and Justice, a policy research center located in St. Paul. Our guest today is Mr. Dane Smith, president of Growth and Justice. Founded in 2002, Growth and Justice has become a valuable resource in state policy development involving education, transportation, government accountability, and tax and budget issues. Prior to his work at Growth and Justice, Dane had a 30-year career in journalism, focusing on politics and government, while working for the St. Paul Pioneer Press and the Minneapolis Star Tribune. Dane, welcome to Voices of Experience.
Thanks very much, Bernie. It's good to be here with you.
Tell us a little bit about your work at Growth and Justice. What is the mission of the organization?
Well, in three words, our mission is a more inclusive prosperity, an expanded prosperity for Minnesota. The word growth stands for our support for business growth and job growth. We are pro-business. But the word justice also is the flip side of the coin and explains why we need to invest in public stuff, education, healthcare, transportation and infrastructure, and a cleaner environment to build the conditions for that job growth. So the idea is one that's all-encompassing. It's very Minnesotan, this idea of public and private working together to make for progress and to help us all do better. I like the way Paul Wellstone said it, but Bill Gates, the richest man in the world, says it the same way. In some form, we all do better when we all do better.
Just plain old common sense.
Just plain old common sense. Nothing like it.
Well, Dane, our program today, and thank you for joining us, we're going to focus on really three areas that touch on what you described as the mission of Growth and Justice. Government, tax and budget issues, and finally, government workers, public employees, if you will. And let me begin by asking you for your kind of personal assessment of public attitudes and reactions to our government and public officials from a historical standpoint as well as recent times, present day reactions.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get, we could spend hours on this topic, of course, but America was sort of founded as a rebellion against a government. I like to half joke that we were founded by anti-government tax protesters. But of course,
In
it was
part.
much more than that. It was all about all men and women being created equal, and it was about equal opportunity. And so from the very beginning, the United States and Americans and Minnesotans have had a balanced understanding of the role of private enterprise and freedom and liberty, and the role of government and equality in inducing equal results or equal outcomes as close as we could get. Or closer than the private sector typically produces. We understand. We found out after about 100 years of history that the private sector was rewarding fewer and fewer people with more and more, and this created the labor movement. It created the progressive reforms of a century ago, because a very few people had most of the income and wealth in this country, and so our entire history has been one about that in essence gets at this conflict between who gets how much. And yet Americans, more than other countries, other wealthy democracies, still have this strong sort of independent suspicion about the role and size of government. In fact, our taxes and our governments are smaller, our governments are smaller and our taxes are lower than almost all the other industrialized democracies, our peer nations, the 20 or so nations that are most advanced and more like us. And we pay a price for that. And I don't think it's an acceptable price. I think we can build our public sector, raise more revenue in this country and this state to build a more equal outcome. So right now our situation is not good relative to other societies.
Do you think, Dane, that there is kind of an intuitive sense about the American people now that you have this anger and frustration amongst a significant segment of our citizenry, that there has been a shift in terms of the wealth that's generated by not only capital but labor, human labor, and that the working class people are not getting a fair share of that wealth that's being generated? I understand that productivity has increased significantly in the last 3 or 4 decades, while wages basically for white males, for example, over the last 3 or 4 decades, I heard Robert Reich speak recently on public
NPR
radio
today,
and laid it out in simple terms that wages were basically flat or falling. Do you think there's a factor there?
I do. I think these facts are uncontested, that the American worker has come through, become more productive. Workers are doing their part to build the economy, and they're getting less for it. The stagnation or decline in standard of living for median income folks, for average income folks, is a fact of life. The wealthy people, as Robert Reich has pointed out, now the top 1% have 23% of the wealth and income in this country. They used to only have 8% as recently as the 70s. So their piece of the pie has tripled as a percentage. And it's not all greed and right-wing policy that has resulted in this. There are two huge factors: the globalization of the economy, having our workers compete with people who have minimal working rights and poor environmental protections in their nations, and who aren't really like us in terms of progressive safety nets and so forth. And then the increasingly knowledge-based economy, so that the few people who have the higher education attainment levels are reaping the rewards of the
technology
economy.
Is a factor
and technology is a factor of that. And so lots of folks are feeling this, that they're getting a raw deal. And so, especially in times of recession, they get angry. And the anger is justified. The target for that anger is off base, however. People are blaming their governments for this malaise and for this economic dysfunction, when in fact the government's role and taxes have never been lower. We have simply not done the things we used to do with the public sector to address economic upheaval and change, to make sure that everybody gets a piece.
Makes a lot of sense.
It does, and it's hard to explain. People don't sort of forget that the collapse of the economy occurred under the administration of an anti-tax, anti-government conservative who had continued policies of almost 30 years that concentrated wealth, reduced taxes, did all kinds of things to undercut ordinary workers' rights and privileges and income, and we're 2 years into a new set of policies that are aimed at a more progressive outcome. And because the results have not materialized yet, I think the anger is as it always is directed against the people who are in charge now.
And the expectations were so high, I think,
Yes.
that were created that there is disappointment, great disappointment.
It's
hard to be satisfied when you've lost your job, and
Right.
couple all of that with what we've seen in the corporate world in terms of workers' pensions and what happened on Wall Street with the investment bankers and all of that heaped on the American worker to a large degree, people losing their homes and
Right.
losing their jobs and their investments, their pensions are gone that they'd saved a lifetime for. And I think it's easy to understand the anger and frustration in that context.
Yes, yeah. Some of it is probably justified. You know, from my personal standpoint, I would have liked to have seen a different kind of bailout structure. But let's not forget how precarious this economy was when President Bush began TARP and began the bailout of those companies. It looked like we would have an utter, complete collapse of the financial structures, not only in this nation but in the world.
Right.
And money,
We were on the edge.
on the edge, on the precipice, and it hurt to watch the billions of dollars that were not given, but were loaned to these financial institutions to stay solvent. But it's being repaid. A lot of it's being repaid. Meantime, even conservative economists, very conservative economists, are acknowledging that the stimulus funds prevented the economy from a further collapse or complete decline. And if it weren't for this, practically everywhere I drive in Minnesota these days, there's new pavement. Right. That's a function of the stimulus.
Dane, let me ask you a question about all of this that kind of overarches it in my mind. Whatever happened to the idea of the common good?
Well, I think it's still there. I think Americans still have it. You know, when 9/11 happened, America came together in a very important way, and faith in government shot up to about 70% from a level it fell to because of Nixon and Watergate, around 50%. That decline we're still suffering from. The Vietnam War, Watergate just did terrible damage to the people's faith in their governments and their elected leaders. So we've been kind of, it goes like this depending on the economy. Clinton was right, it's the economy, stupid. When it improves, people have more faith in everything.
Sure.
And when it declines, even though it's not the government's fault, people tend to blame their elected officials. But I think 9/11 showed that when we're really stressed out, we can come together. So the potential is there. And right now, it's pretty discouraging to see what's being said and what is purportedly mainstream opinion about the size and role of government. But it's interesting if you do any kind of sophisticated polling and start asking people about whether they wanted to do without the economic security that's provided by government, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. If you ask them if they want to dismantle our military and our defense